Hey everyone, this is Darken, and in this tutorial I'm going to talk about painting a female portrait from imagination. And it's going to be a grayscale painting. So I'm using the round brush, and you'll notice my flow is set down to 25%. And that's something that I picked up while watching one of Zhonglu's female portrait tutorials. And that'll just make it so that your painting is a little bit lighter so that it's sort of simulates charcoals, I guess. Like painting really lightly with vine charcoal or something. And so now I'm just blocking in the eye sockets and the bottom of the nose. A lot of times people start out by painting or drawing faces with the sort of the cross method, where they have the line for where the eyes are and then the cross down, or the line down the middle of the face, and then they'll draw the round shape of the head. And when I was going to school, my teachers always told me never to start out with those things, because there's no way you could look at a model and automatically draw in that cross and that circle shape that would accurately depict that model. So basically you would just be drawing something that's completely not accurate that you would have to go back and fix anyway. So we always just started out by usually starting with the eye sockets, since those are big, large shapes, and they're a pretty big feature that you can paint in easily. Now that swatch of color up there that I'm color picking from, that is going to be the darkest dark for right now, so I want to make sure that my darks don't go any darker than that, so that later on I can put down some darks that are darker than that, just to push the contrast of my image. So basically you're saving your lights and your darks for the end of the painting. Now if I was painting this from a model, I would be constantly looking at the model and measuring, how far apart their eyes are, how the length between the corner of the eye and the top of the wing of the nose, and trying to get the angles correct. But since I'm painting this from imagination, I'm kind of just going off of the basic proportions of a face, and typically the eyes are one eye width apart. The height between the top of the wing of the nose and the corner of the eye is usually one eye, and the top of the eyebrow to the bottom of the nose is usually about the same length as the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin. Those types of typical measurements. So you'll notice that I'm not really detailing anything out too much. I'm kind of just putting in the basic shapes, and I want to get most of the head shape down correct first before I start going back in and worrying about details like eyelids and eyeballs and all that detail oriented stuff. So I'm switching back and forth between this rectangular chalk brush that I usually use and the round brush, and both of them are Photoshop defaults that I use primarily for most of my paintings. I mean, there are a couple custom brushes I use, but these two brushes do most of the legwork. And basically the only things they have turned on is opacity jitter set to pen pressure, and you'll find that under the other dynamics when you go to the brush controls. Now just some other quick facts that people always ask me. I'm painting in CS3 Photoshop, and my document is 300 dpi and it's about 2400 pixels wide. Typically what you see from amateur artists is they draw eyes very round, and they don't really take into account that the eyeball itself is a sphere, so you're going to have your eyelid wrapping around that shape. So you need to make sure that you don't paint your eyes completely circular. You need to make sure that the eyelid wraps around the shape. And also, where the eyelid is, there's going to be space between that and where the eyebrow is. So a lot of times people forget that little area as well. And there's also going to be the crease of the eye right above the eyelid, and that It really depends on the race that you're painting. Like a lot of Asians don't really have that crease. Like a lot of times they have surgery performed so that they have that crease to look more westernized. And another typical measurement, if you take the corner of the eye and draw a line straight down, that's usually about where the edge of the wing of the nose is going to be. And also, everyone always asks me about flipping my canvas, and I flip that just so that I can work on different angles of my painting and I can make sure that there aren't any errors or anything, because if you flip your image, a lot of times you can see errors more easily. And I just have that bound to a shortcut, which is Command F on my computer. And so what I'm doing now is I'm making a new layer, and I set it to multiply, and I filled it, and I just dropped the opacity down a little bit. And now I'm actually erasing out the lights. So this is where the light is hitting the face. I mean, this is the same kind of idea of painting on toned paper and then adding in the highlights with like a white Conti crayon or something like that. So you can either paint with white or erase out, and I'm doing a little bit of both. So I'm dropping in some of my highlights a little bit early, but they're not completely white. If you'll notice, I'll probably push those a little bit more towards the end. And right here where the corner of the eye is, that's usually a good spot where you can have some harder edges. Like you're going to want to have a variety of edges in your painting. So for my light source, I'm just going to have it coming from the upper right, which is a pretty typical lighting scheme. So up here, you're going to have light hitting the brow. You need to have this area actually turning form since your brow sticks out. And this is the eyelid crease that I was talking about earlier. Now this is where your knowledge of anatomy and planes of the face and the body really comes into play when you're working from your imagination. The other thing I notice a lot with some more amateur paintings is that they make the whites of the eyes really white. So make sure not to make those too bright. I think my eye is actually a little bit too low, so I'm just going to select it with the lasso tool and then do a copy merge, which is Command Shift C, and then I'm just going to move it a little bit. See, I'm actually measuring the width of the eye to the height of the corner of the eye to the nose, so it's a little bit low. So for both of these eyes, I'm going to do copy merge paste and then move them up just a little bit. People are also always asking how I blend my colors, and I only blend because I'm using the pressure sensitivity of my tablet. So right now I just have, the one color selected, and based on how hard I press, that's how opaque the paint's going to be. Now sometimes I'll color pick areas around it like I did just there to change the colors a bit, but it's mainly just how hard I press down on the tablet. So just adding in the little bit of the shadow under the lip and on the side of the chin. And the chin sticks out, so it's going to be catching more light over here. Same with the lip. The lip sticks out from the face, so it's going to catch some light. And a lot of times in the corner of the mouth over here, you can have like a stronger highlight and a little bit of a sharper edge. Now the other thing I see a lot of people doing, I guess wrong you could say, is that they make the outside of the lips very hard in terms of edges, and lips are a very soft shape, so you want to make sure that your edges are not hard. Usually on the lips where you want to have the hard edge is, where the two lips meet, so the middle of your mouth. Now my value range right now is all very middle key, like I don't have very many darks or bright brights, so I'm going to go back in and push some of the darks and push some of the lights, and I'm going to keep doing that throughout the rest of the painting process. Like typically I start out middle key and then push both ends of the spectrum. Yeah, and sometimes I don't do it enough, which is where adjustment layers come in handy, so you can change levels and color balance and all that stuff. Even though I'm at this point where I'm starting to add in details, I'm still not zooming in. I'm painting zoomed out so that I can see the entire thing, so that I can make sure that elements relate to other elements correctly, and that everything is coming together. The top of the forehead up here is also where you can have another strong highlight. That and the tip of the nose are usually going to be where the strongest highlights are. And the other thing you want to pay attention to is that everything on the face has volume and form, and even like the wing of the nose, it's going to have different planes. So make sure that, like the bottom of the plane is going to be a little more in shadow than the side or the top. And just being aware of those planes will help you add more form to your paintings. So for the eye, I'm zooming in a little bit just so that I can get these shapes a little more accurate. And even the eyelids, they have form as well in different planes. So like the bottom of the eyelid has a plane, and then it has thickness, so it's going to have a top part as well. And the upper part of the eyeball is going to be catching some shadow from the upper eyelid, and that'll help create some form in the eyeball itself. So see here, I'm adding in the highlights to the top plane of the eyelid. I'm just adding in a little bit of a highlight on the eye. And like these creases up here, they can have a little bit of a sharper edge. So here I'm just going to check the measurements, the top of the eyebrow to the bottom of the nose, and the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin, just to make sure things are fairly accurate in terms of proportions. And it's the same idea as holding your pencil up in front of you and measuring different things on the model. This is just like the digital way of doing it, I guess. This is just another rectangular chalk brush, but this one has a little bit of an added texture to it. I like using that a lot, especially for like shadows and things. And the chin was looking a little bit too long. Maybe it was too strong or something. So I'm just gonna cut it down a little bit to make her look a little more feminine. The jaw shape can really affect the masculinity of a female. So if you want a tougher looking female, I guess you can kind of square up the jaw a little bit. But you just want to make sure not to go too far, because then she's going to look a little too masculine. So over here I'm painting the shadow that's under the ear. And this is where the ear painting demo will come in handy. So just blocking in the basic outside shape of the ear. Now I'm going in and adding in a little bit of a highlight on the bridge of the nose, and just where you put this highlight can determine what the nose shape will look like. Now, when you're studying faces or just any anatomy at all, you need to make sure to really look and observe at what the shapes are doing, like the nostril. Everyone has a specific nostril shape. It's not just like an oval or a circle or anything. They have a distinct shape. So being aware of even those small details will help add to the realism of your piece. I think a lot of times when people start out drawing, they think they know what a person looks like, so they don't really take the time to really observe and see what the shapes are actually doing. They just have this preconceived notion of what a human should look like, and so they try and draw that when it's not entirely accurate. It's like a lot of times in figure drawing classes, the teachers will always say, take time to actually observe what the form is doing. You have to kind of try and forget what you think you know. And a lot of teachers will have you do like blind contours where you're not allowed to look at your page when you're drawing. You can only look at the model. So that forces you to really look and observe at what the forms are doing. I'm just strengthening some of these cast shadows a little bit. And on cast shadows, the area that's closest to the item that's casting the shadow, that part of the shadow is going to have a little bit of a harder edge. And as the shadow goes away from that object, it's going to diffuse a little bit so you can have a softer edge on it. So with one shadow shape, you can have different edges. And in very basic terms, you can think of the forehead as kind of like a rectangular box. So you're going to have this top plane, and then the front plane, and then the side plane where most of the light is catching. The ear shape too, every little form in there is going to have different planes. Right here where the helix turns shape, that's where a lot of times you're going to have a sharper highlight. I'm going to go in and just block in the main shape of the hair using the rectangular chalk brush that has a lot of texture to it. Now the key to painting hair is that you want to block in big, large shapes, and then from that large shape, you're going to want to pull out small details and highlights here and there. Like you don't want to paint every single strand of hair. Like you want to take it in big chunks. I decided to give her dark hair because she's very light skinned, so it'll be a good contrast, and it'll pop her head from the page a little more. And I'm just going to have to make sure that the hair on this side is going to be darker than the shadows, just so that the face pops again. So even with hair, you can kind of break it down into planes. Like this whole side is going to be one plane, and then it's going to curve down into this other plane, which will be a little bit darker probably. And then you'll have the top plane of the hair, which is going to have more highlights. And a lot of times with the hair, you can be a little more loose with the edges, and then you can just pull out some sharper strands of hair, or be a little bit sharper with the edges on the highlights. But the rest of it you can kind of just fade into the background a little bit. So this brush here is kind of like a little bit of a blurry brush, just to get the softer edges. That way you focus more on the face instead of the hair. Now I'm just blocking in a little bit of the neck anatomy, and I'm giving her a fairly long neck. Like that's one of the other um, distinct features, I guess, of painting females, is having long necks. And I'm back to blocking in the rest of the hair. And I'm also painting this in with the direction that the hair is going. Like I'm not just coloring in, all in one direction, kind of like kids would if they're filling in a coloring book. Like I'm actually painting in the areas as the way that the object is going. And now I'm just pulling out some little highlights and strands of hair. Another thing that my heads and hands teacher just always talked about was that when we're painting from a model, don't be too worried about getting it to look exactly like the model, just as long as you're painting a nice head. Now it's good advice for students, but if you're commissioned to actually paint a known figure, then yeah, you're going to need to worry about likeness. But when you're learning to paint heads, if it doesn't look exactly like the model, don't worry too much, just as long as you're painting a nicely shaped and formed head. Once you have those basic fundamentals down, then you can start worrying about how to achieve likenesses. Right now I'm kind of just jumping around the painting, adding in some darker darks and refining little shapes here and there. And I'm working over the entire painting at once. Like, I usually don't focus on one specific area and paint that until it's finished. I like to work on all elements so that everything is coming into focus as I'm working on the painting. I'm still not really sure if I like the face that I'm painting. Like, something seems off, but I can't really pinpoint what it is. That's why I keep flipping it and measuring things, and I'm thinking maybe her nose might be too short. So I'm just selecting that and doing another copy, merge, and paste, and then just transforming it and making it a little bit longer. Going in and fixing the areas around it. I'm just checking things over again, trying to see if I need to make other changes in terms of proportion. Then I'm going back in again and adding some more darks, like the nostril and the corners of the eyes and the mouth. And it's going to be the same thing with the hair. I'm going to go in and add some darks in key areas. So you're just adding in that little area of dark is starting to pop the form even more. I'm going to do that over here too. Darken this area up a little bit. Now this eye on the far side that's in shadow, this can be a little more loose. Like, I don't have to be as refined with it as the other eye, because the other eye is going to be in the light and it's more of a focal point. And if you paint the eye that's in the back, that's in shadow, a little more loosely, then it kind of gives your painting a little more depth, I guess, because you don't want everything in sharp detail and in sharp focus. looking back at this painting now, I can tell that the eye on the far side that's in shadow is a lot higher than the other eye, so I'm going to have to go back in and fix that. Now I'm going in and I'm pushing some of the highlights in the hair just to give the hair a little more form and volume. So yeah, now I can go in and move this eye up a little more to make it in line with the far eye. And same thing, copy, merge, paste, and then I'm just moving it up with the arrow keys while I have the move tool selected. So here I'm just checking the angles, everything should be parallel to each other. Now I'm going back and checking the width of the eye with the height of the eye to the nose. Just checking my changes. I can actually get rid of this swatch up here since I've already gone darker than that, since I'm starting to get into the final phase of my painting. And I can also crop it down since I don't need all that bottom space. Now a lot of times females will have larger eyes, or that's one of the things that you can push to, kind of show that this is a female, is that they have larger eyes. So I'm just making her eye a little bit bigger. I don't know if I really like the way I painted the hair up here, so I'm just gonna erase that out and try repainting it. The form just didn't really look right, I guess. Maybe it looked like it was at the wrong angle or something. Like, I don't think it lined up with the center of her face. Her chin and jaw are still bothering me a little bit, so I'm just gonna make it a little more rounded, and the jaw over here where it curves and meets the ear, I'm gonna make that a little more rounded too because it was kind of blocky. And I also want to soften up the shadow over here where the jaw meets the ear. Like, I don't want it to be too strong. I think the highlight on her forehead is a little bit too low. Like, the way the forehead turns form, I think it should be a little bit higher, so I'm just gonna move these highlights up a little bit so that there's more of a plane on the side of her face. And also on the far side of the forehead, there wasn't much form over here. It was just kind of flat, so I'm just adding in a little more um, form just to show that it's rotating around back. I think the far eye might still be a little bit too high, so I'm going to do copy merge paste and move it down a couple pixels just so that it's more in line with the other eye and the rest of the angles of the face. Now this brush that I'm using is a fur brush, and I'm just gonna try using that to block in some of the hair. But I'm also gonna go back in over it and paint in strands of hair over it. One of the things I actually want to work on is having better brush strokes because, zoomed up a little bit, as you can see, I don't have very many like cool artistic brush strokes. Like I tend to paint a lot in an area, so it ends up becoming really smooth. So that's one of the things I want to try and push in my other paintings, I guess. Like I always really envy the guys that can paint very loose, but it still looks awesome. I'm going to go and add an adjustment layer and do levels. And I'm just going to reduce the number of whites and then mask out areas where it should be the brightest. Now usually people's ears are about the length of from the bottom of the nose to the eyebrow, and that can change on people. It just depends on the person. But for this one, I think I'm going to move it up so that it's more in line with the bottom of the nose. I'm just measuring right here. And the eyes still feel a little bit too small, so I'm going to select it and copy merge and just do a free transform just to make them a little bit bigger. And move it over to make sure it's in line with the wing of the nose. Since I made the other eye bigger, I'm going to have to make this far eye a little bit bigger too, because now it looks too small. So same thing, copy, merge, paste, free transform. And I'm just moving it over with the arrow keys, because you can go pixel by pixel that way. And that about wraps up this tutorial on how to paint a female portrait from memory. So I hope you guys learned a few things about proportions and measurements and things like that. So thanks for watching.